For 47 years, the D.C. elite has made one country great. Joe Biden has led the charge.
I believed in 1979 and said so, and I believe now that a rising China is a positive development.
China stole American manufacturing and hoarded our emergency stockpile.
We're not trying to slow down Chinese growth.
Now more than ever, America must stop China. And to stop China, you have to stop Joe Biden. America First Action is responsible for the content of this advertising.
He failed to act. So now Trump and his allies are launching negative attacks against Joe Biden to hide the truth. Here are the facts. Joe Biden warned the nation in January that Trump had left us unprepared for a pandemic. Then, Biden told Trump he should insist on having American health experts on the ground in China.
I would be on the phone with China and making it clear, we are going to need to be in your country. You have to be open. You have to be clear. We have to know what's going on.
But Trump rolled over for the Chinese. He took their word for it.
The president tweeted, China has been working very hard to contain the coronavirus. The United States greatly appreciates their efforts and transparency.
China, I spoke with President Xi, and they're working very hard, and I think it's going to all work out fine.
First major clash between President Trump and Joe Biden, it's over China. Both candidates recently released campaign ads and messaging around others' past comments about naivete around China.
Who is this strategy going to work better for? Journalist Zaid Jilani joins us now via Skype with his perspective. Always great to see you, Zed.
Yeah, great to be here.
All right, we have our opinions here, but I'm not going to put any spin on the ball. What do you think about this burgeoning debate over China and who it sort of plays better for?
Yeah, I mean, I think that President Trump came into office sort of talking a tough line on China. He had also spent a lot of time in his kind of private business career talking about China. He started this trade war. I think he has a reputation of being kind of a hawk on China, and Biden's sort of the opposite. You know, Biden has that history of being very friendly to greater economic and political ties with China. And I think that because of that, most voters probably view Trump as the greater China hawk. But the twist here is that Trump, because he wanted to get his trade deal done so badly, I think put a lot of faith and a lot more hope into the Chinese government earlier this year when they really weren't able to control the viral outbreak. So I think that has kind of hurt Trump's image in a way. And I think this has given Biden an opportunity to kind of say that actually it's Trump who was too soft on China when it mattered.
Well, that's, the fascinating dynamic here. It's about rhetorically, the Trump administration, or Trump was saying nice things about China and yet had kind of a harder line stance and has for his entire career. Biden kind of the opposite, now having rhetoric, but on a policy matter, very different story. Zed, one of the things you highlighted a lot during the campaign was actually the Biden trade record on China going back to the mid-2000s. Tell us about that and some of the research that you uncovered and the things that you found.
Yeah, so Biden actually, he was a strong advocate of what's called normalizing trade relations with China. So it used to be that, they'd have an annual review or semi-annual review where you'd have to review China's human rights record, things like that, and approve our trade relationship with them on a kind of regular basis. Basically, in 2000, that was eliminated because we gave them permanent normal trade relations. And Biden was a big advocate of that. He said on the floor, I have this written down, that he doesn't foresee a collapse of the American manufacturing economy as China, a nation with the impact in the world economy about the size of the Netherlands, suddenly becomes our major economic competitor. So he said he didn't see that happening. He compared them to the Netherlands. His record on China certainly has been to be a China dove. I think he used to joke with Xi Jinping, as much as Trump has been as part of his trade negotiations complimenting Xi, I think Biden has a similar record, although going back much further. So I think, Biden is certainly, if you look at Biden's record, his record has been very poor on this. And I think that right now they're trying to use this viral issue, which Trump, I think, did mismanage, and Trump didn't. He put a little bit too much faith in the Chinese government. They're trying to use that viral issue to kind of drive the message that actually Biden is the China hawk. But, when the rubber hits the road, what is Biden going to do differently? Is he going to account for his own record? I mean, I think this is a candidate who often kind of eludes or skirts his record. He doesn't really explain how his thinking has changed. And I think that's something he's going to be forced to do because it doesn't look like the Trump people are going to let this go. So.
Yeah, I mean, clearly what he's trying to do here is muddy the water, right? So that it's a little bit less clear who's on what side, because they're looking at the polling and they see that the American people are on the side of a more hawkish stance towards China. So they want to sort of muddy up the issue a little bit to get around what his past record clearly is. But on the other hand, this doesn't seem like particularly strong ground for the Biden campaign to stand on. As you point out, there are a lot of reasons to be critical, legitimate reasons to be critical of President Trump's approach to handling the coronavirus outbreak. It seems to me that for the Biden campaign to fixate on his approach to China is not particularly strong ground for them to stand on in terms of framing this debate and the conversation that you would want to have.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Trump campaign has copious amounts of material in terms of how not only Biden, but I think a series of previous presidents handled China. I mean, it's basically been an appeasement policy since the late Bush era and the late George H.W. Bush era and the Clinton era. And I think that, it could be a positive thing for the country to have a real debate about this. But I think if it's just this sniping about quotes from each other, someone says something too nice about, Xi Jinping at some point, that's not as productive. But I think if they end up having a real debate about what they should actually do with China, I mean, should we be talking about supply chains with China? I mean, it's very interesting that Doug Collins, who's challenging Kelly Loeffler for the Senate, who's a Republican, was saying we should be moving key things like medicine, like manufacturing of like arms and things like that out of China back to the United States. And it's funny, after 20, 30 years of Republicans saying the opposite, outsourcing is fine. It's fine to have everything overseas. It's interesting that they're trying to shift their rhetoric. Now, whether that rhetoric leads to an actual policy change is a different question. But I think once you have the debate, that's the first step towards possibly doing that. So
I think that's right, Zed, and that's one of the ways the conversation has shifted so much, especially with coronavirus. What's your general assessment of the Biden campaign right now, Zed? One of the things Crystal and I have showed here, especially with the public polling, is that Biden actually has the lowest amount of trust for the American people on who to trust in terms of how to handle the coronavirus. He's at 26%. The Trump administration, I think, around the 36. I think the president's at 36%. What do you owe those low numbers to? Because this seems to be one of the only elections in American history, it's possible, that could just turn as an up or down referendum on handling of the virus and how it went.
Yeah, well, I think, first Trump benefited from a rally around the flag type of effect. He benefited from kind of coming around slowly, as many other elected officials in this country around the world did. But I think two things. One, the public health disaster, of course. But I think what's impacting far more people right now is the economic disaster. And I think, Biden hasn't been out front. He hasn't been public and present. He hasn't really been leading in terms of proposing legislation. He hasn't been leading in terms of being out there in the media talking about this. And that's hurt him. But people do remember who the president is. And I think as these unemployment numbers tick up, and we have over 20 or 22 million people have filed unemployment claims, people are going to remember who the president is. And generally having a high unemployment rate is very, very bad for a re-election of a president. And I think, a lot of this has to do with, one, is Biden going to ramp up his actual public leadership and presence and actually make proposals and be seen as kind of being a shadow government or shadow leader? Because if he isn't, then I think some of the lead he could be getting from the economy sinking and from Trump kind of dithering in the face of that, some of that could go away if Biden doesn't get out there. So.
Yeah, well, and President Trump is obviously very visible because of the daily press conferences and being the president, and the media is always extremely fixated on him, even in times when it's not really incredibly appropriate. But he has not been particularly, he has not put himself in a particularly leadership position with regards to economic response either, not nearly what he could have done. It appears to me that he's mostly left it up to Congress to sort of negotiate, Mitch McConnell negotiate what they want to do, and then signed off on it once it comes to him. So it seems to me like there is an opening there if Biden could get his act together to take it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if Biden was seen as signaling to people in his party that are in Congress about what needs to be done, I think he could effectively, like I said, lead a sort of shadow government, shadow kind of show some sort of shadow political leadership. Because I mean, honestly, Trump is not doing that as much with the Congress right now. I feel like their general sentiment is that they'll sign what comes across their desk. And I think that if Biden has kind of the same sentiment where he's just kind of playing, he's playing from behind, then neither of them will be seen as very strong leaders here.
Right.
But if either of them steps up and actually starts corralling Congress and says, hey, we need to make sure people are staying employed. We need to make sure we continue to do emergency stimulus checks to people. We need to make sure that paid leave stays in place, that free testing stays in place, and that hopefully free treatment is next, free coronavirus treatment. Then I think it's either one's game in terms of the leadership they're showing. But I think the sniping back and forth, it only gets them so far, because I think right now people really are looking for someone strong, stable, and just kind of who feels their pain and who's actually they feel like is at least taking action to do something for them. We understand neither Trump nor Biden have a silver bullet to get rid of a virus, but they can show actual compassionate and I think firm leadership and actually lay out a path for people about how we get out of this. What are we going to do to repair this economy? What's the road to a vaccine look like? Those sort of things. And I think right now it's just a bit muddled with all the sniping and just the lack of presence from Biden.
Yeah, you need actual thought leadership, and we're certainly not getting that right now.
Great analysis always, Zed. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
Next on Rising, we all want life to return to normal, but at what cost? Julio Vincent Gambudo. He discusses why billions will be spent on advertising to make you all feel warm and fuzzy after the quarantine lifts when Rising continues.